And we're recording. Hello, good morning. My name is John. I'm with broadsheet.ie. It's Saturday morning. This is tomorrow tonight, but it's actually this morning today. We're joined by human rights lawyer David Langwallner.
Good morning, John.
Good morning, David. How are you?
Not too bad. Not too bad. Yeah.
Good. We're going to go straight into it because poor Christopher Plummer died. Well, he was a good age, 91. The actor, The Sound of Music, and
yeah, it stoked up all sorts of resonances for me. I mean, The Sound of Music, of course, is based in Salzburg, and I visited the castle many times. I grew up as a child there. You can't engage with Salzburg or Salzkammergut without it. The Austrians are somewhat embarrassed by it. I mean, Salzburg's a very haute bourgeois city, and it's got Mozart's birthplace and the Festspiele and the opera, so they find it a little amusing in a way, but there are serious aspects to The Sound of Music. The Von Trapp was a real person. In a sense, he refused a naval commission offered by the Nazis because he didn't agree with them, and his dilemma is a very important philosophical dilemma of that period, which was almost in effect, in German terms, the choice that Martin Heidegger, the great philosopher, made, and the choice that Thomas Mann, the great writer, made. Thomas Mann, the great arch-conservative German writer, told the Nazis to get lost. He didn't like them, left the country, had to go in exile to Switzerland from a very conservative position. Whereas Heidegger sold his soul to the Nazis. And in a very odd twist, Mann wrote a book touching on Heidegger, a fiction book called Dr. Faustus, How You Sell His Soul to the Devil. And Von Trapp did not sell his soul to the devil, which was a very good thing.
Is that story the Von Trapp? Is it? I mean, it's obviously.
No, it's based on underlying fact. Yeah, it is. I mean, fictionalized, romanticized by Oscar Rogers and Hammerstein and the film and everything. But he slightly older, and he was offered the naval commission. And the choice that he and his family, living a peripatetic existence and performing around the world, made was to leave Germany because he wasn't going to work for the Nazis. So it's a very important existentialist dilemma in those sort of situations, particularly if you were like him, although I don't think he was that rich as is portrayed, but someone of means, substance and influence, as was Thomas Mann. But to say no, the ability to say no to that awfulness, was worthy of remembrance.
Did many people in Austria say no?
Well, some did and some didn't. I mean, it rather, the other way of looking at this is Von Trapp is the exception rather than the rule.
Yeah.
And as was Thomas Mann. Most people, unfortunately, were compliant. And the problem with all of that is, in this day and age, complying to very dangerous extremism is an easy way out. And the other point I think about Christopher Plummer is he did this very famous film called The Insider, where he played Mike Wallace, the great American journalist. And it's about whistleblowing. And I do think that film is something you should be remembered for more, because whistleblowing is so central to our culture today. Both private and public whistleblowing is one of the last remnants of democracy left. And in a sense, in an odd symmetry, Von Trapp, played by Christopher Plummer in The Sound of Music, was a former whistleblower or a former dissident, somebody who just says no to corruption.
Didn't Wallace portray the whistleblower? Or didn't the CBS show portray the whistleblower?
Yeah. Wallace, I think, was one of the last of the great custodians of standards, of civic standards in American journalism. They're fast dying out.
Okay, we're gonna have to disagree on Mike Wallace. I think a little bit. I don't think he was the doyen you make out.
Oh no, he wasn't a doyen. No. I agree with you.
I think he was actually kind of a Mockingbird CIA sort of chap, but
there was something quite sinister about him at one level, I suppose. But
yeah, and he worked at a fantastic age, like into his 90s. I think he was still working
that generation seemed to go on and on forever.
Yeah.
But I'd imagine everything was done for them, you know.
Yeah. Can we just go into the Irish Examiner here? man held over body and car. That's a story, a horrible story in Cork, David. We won't go
Yeah.
into that. Some subjudice say rules there. Two men produced fake travel papers at airport check.
Well, I mean, we're getting to the point that we're now quarantining people. And I think in Ireland, they've recently suggested that the police or the Gardaí can go door to door to see if people are quarantining. And of course, we're entering an age of the blocking of the borders. And of course, if I don't know the substance of that story, but if people are using fake passports, it probably involves, in normal sets of circumstances, you would have thought that that was some sort of scam or migrant scam. But in these sort of circumstances, you might think it's somebody trying to gain admission who might actually have COVID or something like that. I mean,
Okay.
I don't know what the precise story is, but the most interesting thing on the Examiner page there is FDP ruling key to pub survival. Fair ball to the Leopardstown Inn, which I frequented many times. It's one of the pubs that was instrumental in getting the insurance companies to cough up so that they can survive. I mean, I'm not a cheerleader for the pub and leisure industry, but I am a kind of cheerleader for small business people. And, you know, the hospitality sector is getting crucified in all of this. And, but the people who own the Leopardstown Inn are very smart people.
Well, there's four pubs involved in what were involved in the action. This is probably how they're going to pay for the for the pub.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, target the insurance companies then on that basis and survive if they ever open them again.
Yeah. Well, the insurance companies are going to pay outs for whiplash injuries to be had, so that may give them enough money to pay for the pubs.
All right. Yeah. Well, there's your priorities in a nutshell. Yeah.
The Irish Daily Mail, 375 fined for going abroad in a week. This is again presumably why they're faking documents.
Yeah, I mean, you can see why people have an urge to flee and an urge to take a break from all of this. Although I would imagine going on holiday to a foreign country now is a bit like out of the frying pan into the fire. Why would you? That said, it is an act of gross dereliction, irresponsibility to behave like that. Fine. And shows the priority, unless there are very good reasons for it. But if it is purely for recreational holiday structures, then it is grossly irresponsible. Particularly, I see in the Daily Mail's headline, had fake essential worker letter, you know?
Well, one passenger had yeah, I mean, there's going to be a small percentage who'll try that, but it doesn't really.
Well, it's also a question of desperation, I suppose. Yeah.
Well,
I'm not condoning it at all. It's thoroughly irresponsible and criminal behaviour. In fact, it is a criminal offence to provide false documents. I've represented people accused of it, both in a prosecutorial and defence capacity.
You wouldn't accept that mental health reasons would be enough for people to want to get out of Ireland. I mean,
it's almost like this coronavirus catch-22 situation. If people are kept under these awful draconian lockdown conditions, then the urge for some respite must be tremendous. And I do think that's a very fair point, John. I think the focus on the virus, no matter how horrible, people are losing focus on people dying of cancer, people having heart attacks, and
suicide.
Yeah, exactly. And suicidal ideation, suicidal activities, and of course also mental health deterioration.
Yeah, completely. But
you're putting people, I mean, whether it is an act of God in the legal parlance sense, people are being put in very extreme situations. It's no wonder that certain actions, but of course a lawyer looks at this in mitigation in a way, or an explanation, or there could be all sorts of legal defenses, temporary laws of sanity and so on.
Yeah, I imagine if these go to court, there will be, I mean, in terms of sort of people trying to preserve their mental health, would be a strong enough reason.
Well, I'm not sure the specifics of the Irish offence, but I would imagine that there are questions of certainly mitigation of punishment and explanations which might go to whether they had the requisite mental intent, if it's to be very technical, if it's a crime of specific rather than basic intent.
Okay. And the Daily Telegraph in the UK, pubs may open in April with no alcohol.
Yeah, I don't get that at all.
No, I think it's in April, opening April 1st.
April Fool's Day. Oh, well, lovely. Well, is the no alcohol the April Fool's joke, or they should have had an exclamation mark after it?
Well, no, I mean, that was my joke, but I think that's bizarre. And again, it's more weird social engineering, trying to change the culture while we've got this crisis,
Yeah, I don't know what motivation is behind that. It does seem to me strange because in terms of the virus will be, if you are reopening the pub, sociability, even if it's orange or coffees, is going to have the virus risk. So it must be in some indirect way an attempt to curb alcohol consumption and change
or change the culture, change society effectively, change the habits of centuries in Britain, certainly, go to the pub.
Well, I mean, one can read too much into something, but there's no doubt that the virus allows the opportunity for all sorts of legislation which would hitherto have left to riots and protests being introduced.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that is the argument, isn't it?
Well, but that's Lord Sumption's position
yeah.
on the slippery slope towards a police state and the restrictions on liberty and movement and quality of life and
well, it's the classic problem reaction solution, isn't it? Really, I mean,
well, the problem
and never let a good crisis go to waste.
Well, yeah, but the question is what sort of agendas are gaining from a crisis, is always the problem.
Well, firstly, business. I mean, if you look at small businesses, the pubs, small restaurants are destroyed.
There was a story in one of the Irish newspapers that the big corporate law firms and big corporate tax firms in Dublin, their business is growing. And that is a world trend towards the triumph of oligarchical capitalism at the expense of small and medium term enterprises. I was in a train station in Ashton down the road, and they've just erected a machine for Amazon, order your books online in the machine and collect them here. And that again is the move away from the small bookstore to the larger enterprise.
But would you have a small bookstore in that village there?
You would have places. A lot of the small bookstores have closed down. There was one in Leatherhead. There's still one in Dorking, and there is no doubt that browsing in a maybe it's me, but browsing the secondhand bookstore is one of the few pleasures of life, in a way, from someone of my generation and possibly others.
Yeah.
Once we got to online purchasing, everything is too remote, and you order them in, and online existences and online food and online everything is not going to create a culture of sociability.
No, but I fear that we're probably similar thinking on this. I think we're in the past, David. I fear.
Me and you.
Well, people who think maybe who are worried about it.
I'm a great believer in Edmund Burke, who's the classic example of a man who made a contribution to both Irish and British public life. And in terms of his understanding of conservatism, conserve that which is good in terms of heritage and tradition, which does not mean a resistance to change, but you don't change for the sake of change. Keeping up with the moving times is, well, how are they moving? That is, again, the man Heidegger dilemma. Heidegger goes, moving times, let's suck up to the Nazis. Man says, no, I'm off to Switzerland.
Yeah.
That's a more amplified level.
No. I think that's a very, very.
But it's a question of conserve that which is good
Yeah.
But then you have to evaluate the traditions that you're losing in an altered universe. And I would have thought small bookstores, small businesses, pubs that you can socialize in and behave responsibly and consume alcohol responsibly are part of the fabric, pastoral fabric of both British and Irish life.
Well, of course they are, but so the question needs to be asked: why are they specifically going out to that trade as such? I mean, particularly in Ireland.
Well,
I mean, in terms of the Irish pub being such a part of our culture, really.
Well, the question is, are they going after it, or do they think that the pub? I mean, if you've ever been to a Dublin pub, as I'm sure you have, and I mean, on a Friday night, the traditional ones like the Stag's Head or Neary's or MacDade's, I don't want to give advertisements, are heaving with people. And everybody walks out after Jolly Japes and they've all got COVID. So you kind of can understand at one level where they're coming from. Whether it's going after or not, I don't know.
Well, things like, okay, we'll open the pubs, but we won't sell alcohol. I wasn't aware of that.
No, exactly. That I don't understand.
Okay, but David, if you question those sort of things, then you're regarded as a kook, questioning the motives behind them. In the Independent, scores of child refugees illegally detained in the UK. Minors across Channel locked up for as long as 65 hours.
I mean, it is going to be the migrants who are going. I mean, there was a porta-cabin facility there. They were proposing, it's been opposed, to detain immigrants recently constructed. And you don't want in Ireland or in Britain a Songat type situation. Direct provision in Ireland is bad enough. And of course, immigrants at all sorts of levels of people who come into the country, from the perspective of a state authority, there is a sense that, there could be a greater COVID risk, but all of this is a form of dehumanization. It's fundamentally contrary to everything that I believe. And
any idea why do you think they're doing this?
Well, I mean, I suppose the public justification would be just as everybody has to quarantine if they travel. But it's difficult to get an accurate read of that. There may be all sorts of justifiable reasons and unjustifiable reasons, and presumably immigration lawyers will work out in the heel of the hunt what the basis for detention was, whether it was unlawful, was it related to certain considerations of COVID. A graphic headline doesn't necessarily disclose what's happening in reality. There may be reasons for it.
Okay, but nothing to worry too much about.
Well, I mean,
you're on the.
Look, I think we're.
The hills are alive with the sound of music, David.
Yeah, well, exactly. I don't think the Von Trapps would have much place to flee to these days.
No, there's nowhere to go.
Yeah, and I think that there's no doubt the world is closing its borders, and the famous thing in Staten Island, isn't it? Bring me your huddled masses. Well, the huddled masses are not being allowed in anywhere anymore, and that is a very dangerous thing. Historically, I suppose the only equivalent epoch of historically was when people started fleeing Europe en masse in the 1930s, and often there were places to go, and Britain was a great receptor of people, from Sigmund Freud to Otto Kahn Freund to a lot of that dignified British academic life and public life. But when you start restricting the best aspects of internationalization and globalization, then things are very worrying.
Daily Star, Jackie Weaver didn't have the authority. I don't know if you've been following the story, David.
No, someone became an internet sensation because
it
was recorded or something on a parish council meeting. I don't know. Was it?
It was actually it was quite funny because it's actually summed up those sort of local council meetings very well.
Well, I thought the funniest thing, one of the funniest things I've ever seen in recent times was when an RT reporter went into Councillor Hugh McAvenny, and
Oh, yeah,
McAvenny sought
yeah,
to bribe him, or some wanted money to do something, and they put it on the internet with the tune of the Macarena or something.
yeah. No,
Local governance is often subject to ridicule. I mean, one thing, Ballymegash Council, Ballymegash Urban District Council in Hall's Pictorial Weekly, and having been at council meetings in Ireland, they're extraordinary occasions and sometimes very unintentionally funny. That's the point.
Well, I think that the guy who you're talking about, I think nothing happened. There was no sanctions. No, I mean, nothing.
No, it's getting ridiculous.
It happened to him.
No, I know. But corruption has become so ridiculously woven into the fabric of Irish life that it's become normalized, and it actually isn't funny.
Well, I mean, it is actually. Sometimes
it is in a dark sense.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
I think the problem is, at a fundamental level, the Irish humour mindset of tolerance for corruption has corroded over time the quality and fabric of our public discourse to such an extent that we always kind of venerate the chancer, and that's destroyed a lot of things.
Okay, that's for another day. Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
I think you're talking about Hawley there, and
not just him.
Yeah, but him being the beacon of that kind of behavior, and
well, I mean, yeah, but he would be the beacon in the 1980s of that sense of the culture of strokes.
Yeah.
But,
which that is all part of that guy.
Well, yeah.
He didn't invent it, Hawley, but
but I think we're in a much more complex form of corruption in Ireland, nationally and internationally today. It is not individual. It is anonymous corporate grey buildings and law firms.
Yeah, and families as well. We don't realise that everybody's related to each other. It's only when you really scratch down and dig down that you realise.
Yeah, well, there's a dynamic.
There's a kind of a familial.
Fine Gael have always attacked Fianna Fáil through someone like Haughey, but the Fine Gael families, Yeats saw this perfectly in September 1913 and his various poems. For men were born to pray and save, and romantic Ireland's dead and gone is with O'Leary in the grave. And the Fine Gael families have run Ireland for 100 years with a kind of sense of dynastic entitlement, and it ill behoves them in a way to go after Haughey. Just different forms of corruption.
Oh yeah. Well, all hands were in the greasy till. I mean, Fine Gael.
But I think the problem is that with scarcity of resources, the measures of corruption are much worse.
David, we've run out of time, sadly, but very interesting, very enjoyable this morning.
Well, go on.
Sorry, did you think Plummer was a good actor?
I think he became a good actor. I think he
wasn't one of the greats, though, was he? He wasn't sort of.
No, he wasn't. But at the end of his life, he was a great supporting actor. And he could do silky and wonderful things at the end of his life with gravitas and age. Some people become, I mean, Sir Michael Caine, who lives in Leatherhead, is a classic example of this. I mean, who'd have thought that Michael Caine would be regarded as one of the great actors, which he is.
Yeah, amazing, really. Yeah.
And he only becomes one of the great actors when he gets over 50, when he gets a bit of, or over 60, even, when he gets a bit of gravitas.
If you last long enough, you'll be a character.
He has a wonderful acting tutorial, and of course the other thing is when Alec Guinness, who was a definitively great actor, got an honorary Oscar, he said about acting, which Plummer became late in his life: show anger, show sadness, same expression all of the time. So people read into you, and of course Plummer's granite-like distinguished face was capable of that at the end of his life. But
Yeah.
he's not one of the great. He's not.
No, no. Also, I don't think he was a very pleasant person. There was also,
There are certainly certain things said. Yeah.
Yeah. David, hopefully we'll see you next week, and we'll see your column. You'll have a column on Broadsheet on Tuesday.
Oh,
So
well,
we
yeah,
look forward to that.
I'm sure some of your readers look forward to it.
I do anyway.
No pressure then, right? Just one final point before
Please,
we go, which is something I did notice, that there are a lot of reports about the mutations of COVID and the ineffectiveness of the present vaccines to deal with the different forms of mutation or limited levels of effectiveness, and also the effectiveness of that in terms of the over 65s, the over 50s, and it is, I think, something that people should pay very specific attention to in exercising choices.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's just gliding through people a little bit.
Okay.
And I think people should be wary, or at least assess that story in terms of their own decision-making process.
Okay, very thoughtful, David. Warning to everybody watching. And David, thank you very much. Have a great weekend, and hopefully see you.
Thank you, John. All the best. Bye.
Thanks, David.